Welcome to Cancer 101, the fundamentals of cancer. In my two previous videos, I discussed chemotherapy, the pros of chemotherapy mostly, and hopefully a good explanation of what chemotherapy is all about. And I was trying to reorder your thinking about chemotherapy because many people have misguided ideas about it. In this video, I want to recap those ideas about chemotherapy, and then I want to go into one additional subject, evolution and the role that it plays in fighting or not fighting our cancer. In my next video, I'm going to talk about why you might want to refuse chemo in a very reasonable way. So far I've been talking about the pros of chemo, and then I'll talk a bit about the cons of chemo in the next video. So let's get to the recap of these major ideas in your way of thinking about chemotherapy. You know, of all the major cancer treatments, surgery, hormone therapy, and so forth, chemotherapy really is the one that pushes people's buttons the most, the ones that, the type of treatment that people seem to be most upset about and resistant to. So let's look at the ideas in favor of chemotherapy. The first idea is people talk about their immune system fighting the cancer. Well, one important fact about your cancer is that before you ever had chemotherapy, you developed cancer. In other words, your immune system failed you. It was not fighting your cancer, at least enough to make any difference. And so that's basically proof that your immune system is not going to be up to the task of fighting the cancer. Second, even if you could build up a very strong immune system, that system is really targeted to fight foreign invaders like the bacteria pneumococcus or E. coli, or viruses like the common cold or the COVID-19 virus that's currently savaging the world. It's not designed, and by design I mean by Darwinian evolution, so it's not designed to deal with non-foreign problems. In other words, your own cancer cells are non-foreign. Your cancer cells are self, not non-self. Things from outside, foreign invaders like viruses, are non-self, but cancer cells are self, and therefore the immune system rightly ignores your own cells, including your cancer cells. And thirdly, I'd like to discuss the idea of chemotherapy clinical trials. So decades of effort and hundreds of millions of dollars of carefully designed and carried out clinical trials prove that no matter what the chemo does to your immune system, whether it weakens it or not, it really doesn't matter. Why? Because those trials show that patients who get chemotherapy do better. They survive longer than patients who do not. And I'm sorry, but that's a simple, plain fact that you really can't argue with. It's just there for everyone to read about. Decades and decades of clinical trials show this is true. Okay, and then fourth is chemotherapy preferentially kills rapidly dividing cells, and those tend to be cancer cells. They are out of control, rapidly dividing, and so at a certain phase in the cell cycle, the chemo interrupts or damages them, and then they die. And of course, healthy cells, which are generally in a senescent phase, meaning they're in a resting phase, just carrying out their regular everyday tasks, are not affected by the chemo because they're just resting, they're not rapidly dividing. And so therefore, as I said, the chemo preferentially kills the cancer cells over your healthy cells. And then fifth, cancer cells are faulty cells that really cannot fix the damage that is done by the chemotherapy, or their repair mechanisms are damaged enough so they do a poor job of trying to repair the cell. And so again, the chemo preferentially kills the cancer cells. Now in contrast, the healthy cells do have those repair mechanisms in place, they're functioning properly, and they go ahead and repair, say, the DNA. They snip out the bad sections and rebuild the section so that the DNA is correct, and then the cell continues to live. So again, the healthy cells outlive the cancer cells, and the cancer cells are easily killed by the chemo. Okay, so that's the recap. Now moving on to the next section. I want to suggest one possible explanation of why our bodies don't have a system to recognize and attack cancer cells. Seems like we should have one, right? So earlier I mentioned evolution. Well, what's the point of evolution? Of course, there really isn't a point per se, but in terms of Darwinian evolution, that explains a reality that has been carried out every day since the dawn of time. So let's say the point is to continue the ongoing existence of a species. How does a plant or animal do that? Well, they do it by successfully procreating and by ensuring that the young are successfully raised to adulthood so that they can then in turn reproduce and keep the species going. So focusing now on Homo sapiens, we can start reproducing in our teen years, let's say between 15 and 20 years old. In much earlier generations, they probably started reproduction earlier than we do nowadays. Then the parents need to protect their children for another 15 or 20 years so that they can start reproducing. And in total, let's call that about 30 or 40 years that the species, a particular member of the species, needs to be alive to successfully transmit their genes into future generations. Also now, let's think about the fertility in modern women. That decreases rapidly in their 30s. And when you consider that ancient peoples were probably very poorly nourished, they had no access to health care, you can assume that most likely their fertility was even shorter lived. In other words, maybe they were only fertile up to 30 years old or 33 years old or something like that. So this means that evolutionarily, members of the species are mostly useless after, say, age 35. Of course, grandmas can still help by chewing leather hides for clothing if they have any teeth left, and grandpas can tell ghost stories around the campfire, but in terms of Darwinian evolution, they are done. Why am I telling you all this? What's this got to do with cancer? Well, let's think about when most cancers occur. Older, right? They occur in older people. Cancer tends to be a disease of aging. The major risk factor for cancer is aging, not genetics, not diet, and certainly not stress. It's just getting older. Anyway, back to aging and cancer and reproduction and child rearing. I think you see where I'm going with this. When you're still young, and then later in your fertile years, you don't want to be struck down with a bacterial infection, and likewise, evolution doesn't want that. Because then you can't reproduce, and that's all evolution cares about, successful reproduction. So we have evolved a regular immune system to fight those dangerous foreign invaders. But when you're old, say older than 35 and can no longer, bear children, evolution couldn't care less. It doesn't care if you die at the age of 52 or 65 or 88 or even at age 39. Evolution just doesn't care. So in evolutionary terms, as I mentioned, you're useless. And so there is no evolutionary pressure to create a specialized immune system that kills your own cancer cells. That's the point. Still, you might ask, couldn't evolution just be nice and give us a specialized immune system to fight the cancer? We might call it the onco-immune system. Onco meaning tumor or unusual growth. So in that sense, cancer. Now, this would be different from our existing immune system in that it would specialize in destroying our own cells that have gone rogue, those darn cancer cells. Our existing immune system might be better called our xenoimmune system because xeno means foreigner or visitor, as in xenophobia. So why not just make an oncoimmune system? Well, the universe is ruled by entropy and energy constraints, and since Darwinian evolution and our human species are both part of the universe, they are also ruled by energy constraints and entropy. So it takes energy to decrease entropy or disorder, and that's what you do when you create a complex system like the immune system. So from an energy standpoint, evolution is not interested in fighting against entropy to create an oncoimmune system that is essentially useless in the only thing that evolution cares about, which is pushing out the next generation of brats. So I hope this gives you some perspective on the immune system question and chemotherapy, which usually comes up in the form of the question, Why would I take a poison like chemo if it's going to hurt my immune system, which I need to fight my cancer? And this is a reasonable question, but it comes out of a misguided understanding of cancer and the role of the immune system. So in closing, I hope you found this video informative. If you like it, please click on like. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. I'll see you in the next video where I'll discuss the reasons you might want to not take chemotherapy. Thank you for listening. Bye.